I rise to speak on the Roads and Ports Legislation Amendment Road Safety and Other Matters Bill 2025. And in doing so, I want to thank my colleagues, the Shadow Minister for Roads and Road Safety and the Leader of Nationals, Danny O'Brien, and the Shadow Minister for Police and Corrections, David Southwick, as aspects of the bill fall under their portfolios. I note at the outset that the opposition, the Liberals and Nationals, will not be opposing this bill and will be supporting, whilst we support some elements such as addressing safety risks to workers through regulating the mooring service providers, we do have many areas of concern and that I will detail. This is actually an omnibus bill covering 8 acts in relation to marine safety, operational, administrative and regulatory processes governing roads and ports. Red flags from the Liberal Nationals' point of view include new powers to give the government the ability to stop the clock on applications to the Department of Transport and Planning for important works which could impact housing development, and the potential for blatant revenue raising through new fees and charges. This Labor government has recklessly blown taxpayers' hard-earned money over 10 years of project blowouts through sheer incompetence and has racked up a debt that future generations of Victorians will be saddled with. They are desperate to get their hands on every dollar in revenue from fees and taxes that they can find. So meanwhile, health and education services have deteriorated and the lack of repair of Victorian roads is a disgrace. Elements of this bill that are less about improving efficiencies and more about giving the government more time to do less and charge more for already existing services. Victoria is in the grip of a housing crisis, a cost of living crisis and a debt crisis. And instead of cutting red tape, this government is adding to it. Instead of delivering efficient infrastructure, they're tying it up new approval processes, and instead of demonstrating a commitment to transparency, they're shuffling investigative powers between acts. I'd like to note that, true to form, we've seen in so many pieces of legislation by this government, they've introduced and tried to ram through that they did not consult with the industry or stakeholders in any aspect of this bill. So this bill amends the Road Safety Act of 1986 to enable additional prescribed persons to collect blood and urine samples, empowering Victoria Police employees to issue infringement notices and prosecute drivers for certain offences if authorised by the Chief Commissioner of Police, and provides the refunding of traffic infringement penalties relating to fees or costs where an infringement notice is cancelled, and extends the time limit for commencing proceeding for certain offences and makes other miscellaneous amendments to that Act. It amends the Road Management Act of 2004 to enable responsible road authorities to be prescribed for certain road infrastructure, and amends the provisions relating to consent for work applications. It amends the Port of Management Act 1995 to clarify provisions relating to the appointment of port managers and to expand the functions of port managers. It makes further provisions for the management of abandoned things in relation to ports and establishes a scheme for the licensing of mooring service providers. It amends the Marine Safety Act of 2010 to clarify provisions relating to the management of abandoned things and clarifies a liability provision relating to harbour masters. It amends the Marine, Drug, Alcohol and Pollution Control Act of 1988 to enable additional prescribed persons to collect blood and urine samples in relation to marine pollution incidents. It amends the Transport Compliance and Miscellaneous Act of 1983 and the Transport Safety Scheme Compliance and Enforcement Act 2014 to relocate the investigation powers of the Chief Investigator Transport Safety from one Act to another and the Transport Integration Act of 2010. And it amends other acts to update department references and make other miscellaneous amendments. According to the Minister, the bill before the House improves safety, achieves operational and administrative efficiencies and improves the effectiveness of transport laws. We would have no concerns were that the only case. However, under this Labor government, whose chronic inability to manage money, reduce red tape or improve efficiencies at all, it is worth closer examination. So the road safety performance in Victoria has deteriorated, and the number of people still dying and injured on our roads is shocking. Under this government, police resources are stretched past breaking point. We therefore agree that provisions allowing additional professionals be prescribed as approved health professionals for the purpose of collecting blood and urine samples for alcohol or drug-impaired drivers are sensible. However, under this government, health services and professionals are also stretched past breaking point. We don't know where these additional health professionals will come from or if the additional requirements of them will be at the cost of other important health services. Other amendments will empower Victoria Police employees to issue infringement notices and prosecute drivers for certain offences if authorised by the Chief Commissioner, ostensibly freeing up sworn police for frontline duties. The Allan Labor government has decimated police resources, and the depth of Victoria's police crisis was revealed at a recent Public Accounts and Estimates hearing. There are 1,100 police vacancies, over 700 officers injured and on workers' compensation, and 300 senior officers are expected to retire early, and there was no additional funding in this year's budget for the Police Academy. Labor has failed to invest the resources needed to train and retain officers, so they are now looking to Victoria Police employees to fulfil a role previously a duty of only the sworn. The Police Association of Victoria is concerned that the issue of a penalty notice is a police power and uses the police discretion to determine whether an offence has occurred, particularly so in relation to seatbelt and mobile phone offences. So for that reason, their preference is that the position remains sworn. They suggest that their hundreds of members that are injured could return to work in positions like this. Of course, the government has failed to consult the Police Association or explore that option. Other police matters in the bill provide for increasing the time period under which the police can initiate proceedings for summary offences related to hit-and-run incidences, from 12 months to 2 years, which we support. Indictable offences are unchanged. There is no limit. Road Management Act 2004, under this, this amends the reforms to the consent for works on roads and are red flags for delaying important works and increasing costs. Effectively, the government is giving itself and councils more time to deal with work applications on and around roads. So under the amendments in this bill, it can stop the clock on applications for works and removes deemed consent for some applications where consent is automatically granted after a period of time. So deemed consent currently allows projects to proceed after a set time if the road authority has failed to respond. Now, according to the government, this is about risk mitigation, ensuring safety and potential infrastructure damage is avoided by following a clear and detailed process. But what is far more likely, however, is that this is just a legislative change to ease the pressure on the Department of Transport, which will, in the process, will potentially add time and therefore costs to important works. These important works may include roadworks, utility relocations and similar works, often involving property developments and housing. This Labor government has already failed to deliver on its own targets of building 80,000 new homes each year, with Victorians continuing to be locked out of the housing market and access to affordable homes. Meanwhile, every major transport infrastructure project of this government has had major cost blowouts and delays, with the Melbourne Metro tunnel costs so massive, the blowout there so massive, the Transport Infrastructure Minister refused to reveal the true cost to the Victorian taxpayer during the recent budget estimates hearing. Year on year, under this government, we've seen $14 billion wasted on cost project blowouts and overruns. Meanwhile, Victorians are being forced to foot the bill for this Labor government's incompetence. In the midst of a housing crisis, the government is introducing more red tape and increasing costs from these delays. The Urban Development Institute of Australia opposes these changes. The Victorian Transport Association is also opposed to these changes. Developers and local councils are worried that these new powers will lead to cost blowouts, construction delays and a bureaucratic gridlock, especially in growth areas where infrastructure must move quickly. Acting Speaker, no one denies the importance of safety or quality assurance, but when the government can't provide a single example in the bill briefing or as a follow-up to that, justifying these legislative changes, it's clear this is about departmental convenience, not public interest. Amendments to the Port Management Act 1995 include a range of provisions aimed at regulating mooring service providers, clarifying port management powers and establishing clearer processes for dealing with abandoned vessels. Now, the licensing scheme for mooring service providers is to be run by Ports Victoria and is supported by stakeholders. Mooring is actually a very high-risk activity. It carries significant safety risks for operators and less than best practice can lead to vessel and infrastructure damage and port disruption. So the bill creates an offence to provide mooring services without a licence, and licensing will ensure providers meet a minimum safety standard and have training requirements and incident report obligations reporting. That said, the bill includes provisions for the government to set prescribed fees for this licensing and their renewal into the future. While no response to our questioning during, again, the bill briefing or follow-up, they claim this is not about revenue raising, but they have no prescribed fee set yet. So let's not forget that Labor have a very long history of introducing taxes, more than 60 new taxes in the past decade, despite, remember, promising no new taxes. So their recent hike to port fees is a case in point. The government introduced their fee increase under the guise of revamping Station Pier, when it was really just another revenue grab for their mounting debt. They ignored the dire cruise industry's warnings about hiking port fees, and the cruise industry stayed away as a result. In a spectacular own goal, the project dropped in visitations at Station Pier over the next 4 years will be costing the government's tax intake from the cruise ship about $9.8 million, nearly $10 million. Total ship visits are estimated to drop by 22%, with turnaround passenger capacity to plummet 72% and overall passenger capacity to shrink by 30%. With Victoria set to lose an estimated $130 million as a result, a devastating setback for the Victorian tourism industry and economy. So we'll wait and see when the mooring service provider licence fee is inevitably announced, how much a licence will cost and the estimated revenue the government hopes to receive. Licensing for safety is reasonable, licensing for revenue raising is not. There are also provisions in this bill allowing port managers to provide a port service such as technical advisory or maintenance services outside the port lands or water, and clarifies they can charge a commercial fee for use of assets and services provided. Again, the government claims this is about cost recovery, not revenue raising. However, with the debt they've racked up, projected to hit nearly $2 billion by 2028, which will be $28.9 million in interest every day having to be paid by Victorians, we know this government is looking for every opportunity to hike up fees and charges. The issue of abandoned vessels has long needed attention. So port stakeholders told me they support the reforms for abandoned vessels, a problem that has plagued the industry for years. And I know of many ports, Port Fairy, Portland, where this has been a problem. The progress has long been unclear and it should have been addressed well before now. So the bill provides a framework for identifying ownership and arranging removal and recovering costs. That is a positive step. If the Minister for Ports and Freight wanted real efficiencies and gains for Victorians, Victorian businesses and industry and the Victorian economy, instead of tinkering around the edges, she should have turned her mind to addressing the monumental failures in her portfolio, such as to get freight off-road and onto rail. The promised Port Rail Shuttle network has failed to materialise, and now the government has revised the estimated completion date to a far-off Q4 in 2029-30. Their stated expectation of the Port Rail Shuttle to move 30% of Melbourne's metropolitan containers by 2050, yet the proportion of containers moved by rail onto on rail instead of truck is currently around only 6%. Now that's gone down an enormous amount since we were in government in 2014 to now only 6%. The Minister is silent on what the delay to the Port Rail Shuttle network means and has kept the industry in the dark on what, if any, progress they can expect. Importers have been paying a levy now for 4 years to the tune of millions of dollars for the Port Rail Transformation Project, and still we don't have a rail shuttle. The Port of Melbourne estimates the number of trucks visiting the port each day could rise to 34,000 trucks by 2050, and their dock, and with the greatest container growth, WebDock, has no rail access. A surge in trucks servicing the Port of Melbourne could undermine any benefit from the Westgate Tunnel for inner west residents who are already literally sick from living with the current pollution. In a cost of living crisis, this government's failure to plan to deliver efficient port services and freight networks has increased the cost of goods and hindered economic growth. Of the Western Intermodal Freight Terminal, the WIFT, the Premier said, and I quote, "Melbourne's West needed the facility immediately, and it had to be the first cab off the rank." That's what she said. Why then has the government backflipped and quietly shelved this project? The answer is because they've blown billions on incompetent management of major infrastructure projects and can't fund the project they said was on the doorstep of nearly 50% of existing interstate freight rail customers, providing access to hundreds of warehousing and logistic businesses in Melbourne's outer west. And they've already paid $400 million towards the WIFT with no result. We have no idea whether that $400 million is recoverable for any future plans or has gone down the gurgler. Over the Port of Hastings now, and there is a 2-year blowout, a delay on the Victorian Renewable Energy Terminal. Following the federal Labor government's rejection of the Allan Labor government's proposal, the Victorian Renewable Energy Terminal at the port, the government quietly announced that they are now actively assessing the role of other Victorian and Australian deep-water ports. And as a result, wind farm construction projects may go interstate. They can't even manage to meet their own legislated renewable energy targets as a result. Back to the bill. There are further provisions under the Marine Safety Act 2010 and Marine Drug and Alcohol Pollution Control Act of 1988, which address the management of abandoned vessels on inland waters and clarify liability issues relating to harbour masters and relocate pollution responsibilities between the Department of Transport and Planning and Crown landholders depending on the source of contamination. The bill removes the Victorian specific liability limits, so the owner of a tanker is liable to pay for oil spills to align with internationally agreed liability limits and standards. And this will enable Commonwealth law to apply in Victoria's waters and provides for spills inside or outside state waters. This is a positive move in responding to marine pollution. Other amendments enable additional qualified persons to collect samples in marine or drink or drug situations similar to the road safety amendments. The bill makes technical but significant amendments by relocating investigative powers of the Chief Investigator Transport Safety from the Transport Compliance and Miscellaneous Act of 1983 to the Transport Safety Scheme Compliance and Enforcement Act of 2014. This relocation appears administrative, but the real issue lies in how the government continues to shield certain sensitive information from being accessed under the Freedom of Information. So under Section 85, documents obtained during the investigation cannot be disclosed, raising concerns about transparency and accountability. While the CITS plays a no-fault root cause analysis role, we must ensure these powers aren't abused or used to cover up government or operator for failings. It's a delicate balance between investigation integrity and the public's right to know. So I want to put on the record that I took the time to consult widely in preparing for my contribution to this bill, and I spoke with the Port of Geelong, Portland and Melbourne ports, Glenelg Moyne Shires, the Great Ocean Road Authority, Gippsland Ports, Shipping Australia, reached out to the Maritime Union of Australia, LW Marine Services, the Police Association of Victoria, my colleagues spoke with, and the Victorian Transport Association, the Urban Development Institute of Australia, and we reached out to the Property Council of Australia. And I would like to thank them for their time in providing their concerns and feedback. So there are some sensible and long overdue reforms in this bill, such as regulating port mooring services and improving the abandoned vessel process. But as usual, under this government, there are hidden areas that are cause for greater concern, that are, really do have real-world serious consequences. The new powers to stop the clock on roadworks applications, which could impact critical housing and property development, and the potential for blatant revenue generation through new fees and charges are among our concerns. However, what is most critical in this new bill, the Roads and Ports Legislation Amendment, Road Safety and Other Matters Bill of 2025, is what it fails to address, which is the serious attempt to improve road safety and the efficiency of Victoria's ports by this tired and lazy government. So it's worth focusing on the missed opportunity that this bill presented the Minister for Roads and Road Safety. The Minister has failed to seize the opportunity to address the appalling and worsening state of regional roads, particularly in southwest Victoria. The government cannot continue to ignore their responsibility to put proper funding and resources into fixing and maintaining rural roads in the state of Victoria. The statistic from the Transport Accident Commission is stark. This year, we have seen a tragic increase in road deaths in rural and regional areas. These statistics, these human people we've lost, friends, family, brothers, sisters, mothers, the statistics are up 23% on last year, 23% lives lost increase. These are the very roads that this government continues to neglect. And it's not just a safety issue, it's a matter of equity and common sense to maintain all roads. This horrific statistic of 23% increase of fatalities on rural roads should be cause for deep concern and a wake-up call to the Allan Labor government to stop claiming they are investing in rural roads and to urgently get on and fix the roads properly. The Victorian Farmers Federation has expressed more than once serious concern about the rising number of road fatalities in regional Victoria, particularly highlighting the poor condition of regional roads as a major contributing factor. Why is the government silent on this contributing factor? Is it that they don't want to admit that their inaction for the past decade leaves them complicit for regional road deaths? Remember, regional road deaths are up 23% this year compared to last year. In the electorate of South West Coast, the conditions are nothing short of dangerous. Road shoulders drop off by over a foot, often and in many places. It's just so confronting. Sometimes the choice is driving so unsafe. The choice is between a head-on collision or falling off the left shoulder of the road into the gravel. And it's really hard to get control back when you're in the gravel. White line markings are either faded or non-existent. Advanced driving aids in modern cars rely on markings to help drivers navigate the roads, and they don't exist. Forget trying to use any of those safety mechanisms for our country roads. We often don't have enough bitumen remaining for 2 lanes traffic, hence having to veer onto the shoulder and drop down dangerously into the gravel where the shoulder drops away when another car approaches. These are the conditions that we face in regional Victoria. But in metropolitan Melbourne, you might see a traffic hazard sign ahead, and that usually indicates a breakdown or roadworks. In regional areas, the road traffic hazard signs indicate the road itself is hazardous. The government loves to boast, and I heard it again this week in the chamber, that they're pouring money into Victorian roads. But when you look at the budget papers and drive on the roads, the figures just don't stack up. It's as though the members opposite are handed talking points and they've never stepped foot on the bitumen outside the metropolitan tram tracks. In southwest Victoria, work has been undertaken on the Princes Highway recently, just outside of Warrnambool. But the new surface ends abruptly, and right beside it lies cracked, broken asphalt in Victoria's Highway No. 1, a most important freight and commuter route. Contractors on the ground tell me they're forced to build roads to substandard specifications dictated by the government, even when they know the surface will fall apart within months. And it does, often weeks. It's beyond belief that this government still blames floods from 2 years ago rather than accepting responsibility for their own inaction. The southwest of Victoria is in the grip of the most severe drought on record. This is not about capability. It's about priorities and accountability. Other states like South Australia build stronger roads with fewer people. The technology exists, but here in Victoria we build roads that crumble quickly with no proper oversight and no consequences for poor quality outcomes. Recently, the Allan Labor government announced that children under the age of 18 get free public transport. Not helpful to regional Victoria because, unfortunately, there's precious little public transport in regional and rural Victoria. Parents have to drive their children everywhere on these appalling, unsafe roads. This bill could have been an opportunity to address rural road safety, to embed proper funding, to lift standards, to stop the waste. But instead, we see another opportunity squandered and more regional lives put at risk. Victorians in the regions are fed up. This government has to do better. We can't see another year next year with more lives lost. It is a disgrace that this year we have 23% more people in rural Victoria that have died on our roads than last year. This government is pouring money into metropolitan Melbourne, concrete, tunnels, and the metropolitan road fatalities has dropped by 7%, which is a good thing. But in the interim, by ignoring Victorian rural roads, the fatalities increase, and by 23% on last year. Someone's mother, someone's brother, someone's loved one. It can't continue on. The roads are a disgrace, and this was a missed opportunity by the Minister for Roads and Road Safety to really address a massive crisis that is really crippling southwest Victoria, regional Victoria, and families are frightened to be on our roads.